Cool, and we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Peter Gostev, who is the head of AI, and we're going to be talking today about designing for AI products from the perspective of someone who is working at the forefront of AI. Peter, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm super excited about this. Usually, we have designers and PMs on the show, and this is the first time that we're having a head of AI. So I'm really, really interested in getting your perspective about how designers can better collaborate with others on tech teams who are building the forefront of AI products. So let's just start with what you've been working on lately.
Sure. So the type of things I've been looking at is really to take advantage of the latest generative AI opportunities and to see what the real opportunities are beyond the hype, beyond maybe the chatbots, and see what else we can do. So yeah, last couple of months I've been spending a lot of time with different teams trying to see what kind of opportunities we can really see. Yeah, and it was I only joined Moonpig, my current role, a couple of months ago, and yeah, you never quite know are there going to be a lot of opportunities or not. It feels like there would be, but now my list is way longer than what I could realistically do. So now it's about prioritizing and really picking the most impactful ones.
I see. That's very cool. What was your background before then, before you joined Moonpig?
Before that, I was in the bank for 5 years in a data science and innovation team, where really the focus was to bring machine learning inside the organization. But more broadly, my background goes back to strategy, and from there I worked in consulting and and focused more and more on the data side of things. So I really came from more strategy consulting background that where you it's not a particularly technical side of things, so it's a lot more focused on problem solving. There would be identifying opportunities, working with stakeholders, doing data analysis, things like that. But as my career progressed, really data was becoming more and more important. Uh,
Hmm.
so uh, I, before my previous role in the bank, I worked for a startup for a bit and was setting up the analytics function there. So that was really interesting to see how we can actually organize our data from scratch. So that was quite exciting. And then after that, transition to the more advanced analytics side of things. And now with the generative AI wave, I double down on the AI side of things.
That's very cool. So can you tell us a bit about how things have changed quite a bit since generative AI exploded in the last 2 years or so?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a big shift in the mood. I would say just I think previously the world of AI really practically impacted maybe machine learning engineers and people like that. But I think now it
Yeah.
really just went way outside of that, and our just general population would be talking about ChatGPT and so on. So that's a kind of obvious, very visible change. And I think I know what we'll talk about today is the hopefully the implications that we start to see on also business side and what the real opportunities are emerging. So yeah, there's been really big shift, and yeah, it's definitely exciting to see what we can, how do we find the right bits in there that we could focus on.
Very cool. So, for some of us who are not super familiar with strategy consulting, can you talk a bit about what that entails exactly? Like, I've heard a bit about, say, BCG or Accenture, but I never really understood what people from those places did exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's probably a mixture of the types of things. The way I look at it is that I think people quite often think about, well, what are these 20-year-old children trying to consult executives on? And I think the way I look at it is really it's a kind of problem solving task. It's not necessarily that they're recommending them anything, but it's a lot more about now we've got this. new market that we want to enter. How should we think about it? Let's find the data, analyze it, break it down, and structure our thinking around this. And then it wouldn't be necessarily up to the consultants to say what's the actual right answer here, but it's at least presenting the information in the right way. So if I relate it to this, I think we are now into the AI world. We are now at a point where there's so many new capabilities that it's really hard to understand to work out what's real, what's going to be impactful, and what's not. So I think whether it's strategy consulting exactly or not, I think that kind of approach of thinking through a problem a bit more systematically, really focusing on what's going to make a difference or not. I think that's a kind of side that's useful. But then many also not so useful sides about like making lots of slides that no one looks at as well.
We do that as designers as
Yeah.
well. We make a
Oh,
lot of slides, and sometimes it doesn't get looked at, unfortunately. So there are a lot of companies that I wouldn't say is necessarily behind on AI, but they're trying to transform their own business and their infrastructure to respond to how all these other companies are very much deep into the AI space. How are you seeing these non-startup or corporations or larger companies try to incorporate AI into their own strategy and business roadmaps?
yeah, I think there's been probably a lot of excitement, and so I can speak for my previous organization. So I used to work for a big organization, a bank, and there's certainly been a lot of excitement. And then the challenge was always how do we get access to large language models in a secure way that's would be acceptable for a bank. And once you get past the access point, is how do you prioritize, align resources, and so on. And there was always a little bit of a mismatch of it's kind of exciting, but do I really believe it? Like that must look good, but how do I actually incorporate it in the business? And then once it start touching the actual operations of the business, you start realizing actually it's not that simple. There are problems with how you validate outputs from a large language model, for example. So I'll give you maybe a practical example. So previously we were looking at personalized messages. So, as any organization, we communicate a lot with customers, but right now, uh, just from a customer's perspective, you kind of get generic messages. Maybe they change the name or something, or maybe at best you kind of get segmented information. But these organizations got enough data on you, so they can probably send you a more personalized message if they could. So, but to actually do that in a large organization, the way it would work is that any copy that we would want to send to customers would go through steering committees reviews. Maybe there would be some FCA assessment and so on. So actually, by the time it gets to the customer, it's been probably like weeks of reviews. So to actually have a generative AI based communication sent to a customer, that's while it might be a great opportunity, it might be much better user experience. In practice, it wasn't realistic to do. So I think for many organizations, there's been mismatch of huge amounts of excitement, quite a lot of demos, and like almost nothing actually gets into production. So that's probably the typical journey. So I think the challenge is like how do you find the right things to go after and actually make a difference?
I think that makes sense. So it's something that we face as designers or product managers quite often as well in larger corporations where there is more of a committee setting.
Mm,
There's more of trying to make sure that things are safe and legal before we put out to customers. I think one thing I also noticed for larger corporations and companies is that it's not only that it's a little bit slower, but also oftentimes there isn't a big enough emphasis on making sure that this tool or this feature is needed and
mm,
is used by actual people and customers. Oftentimes, it feels like they're sticking AI into a product that doesn't really need it, just so that they can say, this is AI powered, we're AI driven. And then for smaller companies, you see more AI first or AI driven features that make a little bit more sense. Beyond the whole by committee thing that slows things down, what do you see as the key differentiator between incorporating AI features that works and is useful versus ones that don't work? And I'm not just talking about the feature itself, but also how the companies go about it in their processes or their strategies that create this differentiation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what we saw a lot, I think very good illustration of that is that we saw a lot of chatbots being built. And I think we kind of went through a wave of I think it was 2014, around that sort of time, when there were a lot of other kinds of chatbots being built, and in reality, people don't like using them. Some stuck around, but it's not a great user experience. And I think similar to here, everyone looked at ChatGPT and said, "Well, you know what would be great if we built a chatbot that is going to answer questions about this, our internal policies or internal documentation, or to answer questions about to help our users in customer service." And I think that's it's a dangerous path to go down where everything becomes a chatbot, because sometimes you really don't need a chatbot, and it's a problematic. Um, I think it's a difficult user interface because inherently chatbots kind of open up too many opportunities for or give too many options to the user. And for example, and I remember when I was demoing DALI to people a long time ago, kind of before ChatGPT came out, I think. And you kind of show people show people DALI and say, you can generate a picture of anything you want. And guess what they write? They write dog or a cat. So it's quite hard for people to just imagine what could be done. So um, and I think that the point I think that you're making, and we see a lot, is that people just kind of jump on the things that they see and they try to replicate the same thing, which is okay to start with, but we just need to be conscious that that's not necessarily the longer term answer. So I'm quite keen to um, try and um, really zeroing in on where the opportunities lie. So maybe actually, if we can share the screen, maybe that could help as well. So um, I pulled out a few different types of opportunities that I think are quite impactful. This is definitely not a complete list. There will be definitely other things there, but this is just a illustration of few different points that I think are worth looking at. So one, for example, here is untapped, unstructured data. So quite often, an organization would have a lot of data that they haven't really looked at. So it could be customer service conversations, phone calls, chats, NPS feedback that they keep asking for customers, but in reality, no one really looks at. Then it could be images as well to a lesser extent, maybe depends on your business, and a bunch of other things. So previously, it's really hard to make anything out of this data because you had to build a more precise model. You would have had machine learning engineers, data scientists building something for months, and maybe all they get out of it is a kind of sentiment score. Is it kind of good or bad kind of thing? But right now, really, with a few clicks, you can get much better, much more impactful output. And maybe I can show a little bit of that, what I mean. Um, the second one here is a one-step task with instructions. So what I mean by that is that um, it's something where we don't have to have multiple steps to execute a task. So it could be write a job description. So I've built a little GPT that has a template for our organization to say how we write job descriptions, and then now we say recruit a senior designer or write a job description for senior designer, and it wouldn't write a generic one, but it would write one for that is specific to us. And then the important thing there is that we kind of really pick out a few tasks that where where we can write one set of instructions. It's not going to make massive difference, but it could make a good amount of difference to that specific process. And the last point there that I think a lot of teams are looking at is this kind of chat to data idea, chat to your documents idea. And quite often, what I see is that there will be many companies who've got HR policies, brand guidelines, tone of voice guidelines that like people don't really read because it's just not typically not very engaging. But attaching a even a chatbot to contradict my point earlier, I think that's appropriate use of chatbot. Then maybe that becomes a kind of a useful application.
You mentioned earlier that you mentioned that it was dangerous. Could you define that a little bit more? Do you mean dangerous in terms of people misusing it or abusing it, or more so we're falling into a single paradigm of chatbots when we should be exploring other types of UI paradigms?
Yeah, I think dangerous. Actually, it's I meant it in the second way, but it's definitely also dangerous in the first way. Just and I think that there is a technical point there that the difference between maybe other uh, uh, technologies that we had, because this one is quite more capable. It's much more open. The downside of that is that you can actually subvert these systems, and I've had a lot of fun doing that
Right.
before. So basically, when you have a free an interface where user can input some information, that quite often could actually open that system up to prompt injection and hijacking and so on.
So,
But yeah,
sorry, go on.
but yeah, and in the second sense, in terms of that being dangerous in the sense that we just design a bunch of chatbots for everything, the danger there is that we just not going to get much value out of this. And I think as for example, me as a person who is interested in and pushing forward the benefits of AI, and I see a lot of opportunities in that. I think that will be a disappointing outcome if a couple of years later the people who benefit from this would look at it and say, actually, I now have to chat to 40 different chatbots to get my job done. I don't think everyone will benefit from that. And I think that's a probably dangerous in the kind of softer sense of probably we're just not going to get a lot of benefit out of it.
Unless you get one chatbot to rule them all and say, use this chatbot to talk to the 40 other chatbots and come to consensus. Um,
Yeah, and I think
I
it's a yeah, it's a kind of it's an interesting idea, and you obviously kind of ChatGPT is a version of that, but I think I wasn't sure about how it would work out. But I'll tell you, for example, the job description point that I made before, um, you don't really need to explain anything. You can just get your task done in 2 words. So I think there's something quite powerful about that as well. But yeah, I think we'll need to see how things develop.
So this kind of takes us to the crux of our conversation. And I fully agree with you that oftentimes we default into the chatbot paradigm when it comes to generative AI. That's how Midjourney does it, ChatGPT does it, basically all the forerunners within the space. And as designers, we love to create new user interfaces, even if it doesn't make sense at times. But it often feels like we're brought in way too late in the process and we're hitting engineering constraints or on the bottom part of the feasibility section that you're talking about. We're told we need to do it this way because that's what we're capable of doing right now. We need to launch this right away. If you're working with a designer and you believe in creating better or different or newer user interfaces to better leverage the technology and the opportunities in front of us, how should we be navigating this to make something like that happen? Because as designers, we often feel like we're just hitting a brick wall. We're like, yeah, let's try this thing a little bit differently. Let's make this better. But the powers that be oftentimes could be the head of the AI team saying, no, we need to do it
Mm.
this way. Is there anything that we can think about or do or say that can impact the outcome?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I've got like a perfect answer, but I think you mentioned the point of power and who's got power, and I think it's an interesting one that I would say previously with the machine learning paradigm, I think the power was a lot more with engineers and because and data scientists, machine learning engineers, that really without them nothing would happen because they need to spend months building something, and if that's how they build it, that's how it is. And I think here I personally experimented with a bunch of stuff in sometimes in a couple of hours. You can build things pretty quickly. You can code with ChatGPT. You can deploy things quickly. It's a lot easier to experiment, and more importantly, um, I mentioned, for example, maybe not to the user interface point, but I mentioned before that you needed a machine learning model previously to, for example, classify a conversation. And then here I've got the OpenAI playground, and I've got just a random review I got of Trustpilot. And then here, what I've done is that I've prompted it to extract information out of it. So previously, before you'd basically be able to say, is it like a positive or negative? Maybe you can do that bit. Maybe you could do classification. But in here, just in literally 5 minutes, I wrote this thing which said, uh, write a short summary, identify the issues, identify advanced sentiment. This is not something data scientists would really do. And another cool thing is maybe you let the model guess what the MPS was. Now, the well, this is maybe not the user interface point that you're driving at, but the point here is that before this would have been impossible for anyone apart from machine learning engineers to do. Now we can do it in 5 minutes. So I think the my broad answer to this is that don't I wouldn't assume as designers as product people, don't assume that you just need to wait for engineers to kind of build something or come up with ideas. I think the world has shifted that right now you can do a lot more. Now you wouldn't be able to build a production system by yourself because it does involve engineering, but to build a demo to really explore something, I think you really shouldn't wait for engineers, shouldn't rely on engineers to for them to build something. So I think uh, I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot more people to do good things here.
Got it. Got it. Could you, and feel free to pass on this question, but could you broadly talk about what your team makeup is like currently in terms of engineers, business people, designers?
Yeah, so I think just broadly, and I think it varies a little bit, but we've got engineering team, product teams, design teams. They kind of work together on different parts of the flow of the user flow. So they would collaborate together, and then from AI perspective, and I guess they form kind of small groups that would work alongside those. And then from AI perspective, the way it's early days, but the way I envision it going is that at the beginning we would want to have a few people who are more specialists in AI and would collaborate with those teams who own a specific part of the regular domain. So it could be, for example, a search team, who could be onboarding team, things like that. And we would work with them and say like let's try and do things that way. But longer term, I think the important thing, what I wouldn't want to happen is that we would have kind of AI teams who would sit and kind of just do AI stuff. I think the right answer is that really all of teams would be upskilled enough and would have the right ideas to just do that work anyway. I don't think there's anything particularly special about AI. So if you're a designer or engineer and you need to solve a problem or you've got some ideas, you can use your traditional tools, you can use AI tools. That doesn't shouldn't really matter in the longer term.
I love hearing that. So, if I were a designer at Moonpig and I want to come up with a new user interface that can leverage the engineering feasibilities that we have and also the business opportunities and customer needs, how should I be approaching you to talk about this?
Yeah, I think um, it's quite tricky, and I think the reason why it's tricky is that I don't think we've got the established patterns. We don't really know what's going to work yet. So I think the way to think about it right now is that there's probably a balance that we want to strike, and maybe it's hard for me to kind of speak on behalf of designers to see what's the best thing for them. But I think what what I want to have is a probably a bit of a portfolio of things that I'm pretty sure are going to work. Like for example, what I'm showing on the screen, so we can add some value, and then to have some things that maybe I'm not sure are going to work. So maybe I'll show you one example. So there's an interesting new idea that came out and a new model that came out. And let me see if I get the GPU to do it. But um, so I need to write a prompt. I'll pick a style, and then hopefully it'll generate something. So if not, I've got one image. But oh yeah, it's generating. So what I mean by this is I'm not sure it's going to work. Is that there are definitely user experience implications and the technology implications and variability implications. But in here, I think, and from designer's perspective, I think it would be really cool to be aware of new models that come out, and then to be able to come up with new ideas to say, you know what, if we did have a customer, an image from a customer, which is, that's my picture, it's pretty bad picture. Nothing, it's a kind of picture that anyone could upload. But in here, that's pretty cool. In a few seconds, you get like pretty decent image, and maybe with a better prompt, maybe a slightly better model, we could make it even better. So, but I think there are a lot of user experience implications that I'm not sure are definitely good or not. So, I think maybe to come back to your questions more precisely in terms of what would be the right approach is, I think it's it is having awareness of what is possible, and by the way, it changes all the time. This model only came out like 3 weeks ago, and before that you couldn't really do that. uh, Being aware of what's possible, really experimenting, and really being uh, basically assuming that we don't really know what's going to work, and then experimenting together. I think that's the way forward, because we shouldn't be too arrogant to say that we know what's going to work.
I like hearing that. It sounds like understanding the tools, the technology, what's out there in the field right now is really important to helping us know what is doable, what's not doable, and to extend that if possible. Uh, and I guess I want to go down this line of questions because it's really to show how designers should be keeping abreast of all the developments and all the changes. So I'm going to ask, what is your background like in terms of the technical aspects? Like, do you code stuff? Are you into machine learning, uh, technical stuff as well? Or are you more on the business side of things?
Yeah, so I'm definitely more from the business side, and I think I would always be interested in technology, and especially in the last several years, data science, machine learning. So I would understand it to a good enough level that I could talk to data scientists about. And I think that's for me, that's probably the test. Could I intelligently talk to engineers about it, and then sense check if I see in their eyes that they feel like I'm talking nonsense, then that's probably a bad sign. But I think getting to a point where you can talk comfortably and you understand the concepts at the kind of the right level of abstraction, that was really the goal for me. In terms of coding, uh, a little bit, but nothing that I wouldn't write an actual app to put into production. But the what's really changed now with ChatGPT, it's really not difficult to code at all. Obviously, if there are any engineers listening, they wouldn't appreciate that comment, because I think still to build a production app, especially to change your existing code base, that is not enough. So you need to know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing and you want to code up a little prototype or a little script, Like there's not really anything stopping you. It's just a little bit of experience doing it, but it's not too hard to do. So if you're kind of unsure and you always felt constrained that you're not able to code, like that's really not a constraint. And I would say what's the harder part is actually what do you do with the code. So one thing I'd encourage you to do is if if you're interested in deploying things quickly and actually putting code to production, Replit is pretty amazing. So Replit is an online development environment. So from here you can actually just take put some code, and they've got assistant as well. They've got like a coding assistant. Um, and so it can help you do that. I think you need to pay to access it. So you can ask a question. I think it's GPT-4 powered, and they've got some of their own models, or otherwise just code in ChatGPT, copy pasting here, and you'll get bugs. Just copy paste the error back to ChatGPT. It will know what's wrong, and just keep going like that. And I think it's not trivially easy, but it's really worth experimenting, putting a bit of time in. I think it really unlocks a lot of capabilities for you.
That's amazing. So we actually met over LinkedIn when I saw one of your posts when you talked about what AI is capable or generative AI is capable of and what it's not capable of. So understanding limitations, super, super important. And I thought that was invaluable for designers like myself because things are changing so quickly that we don't always know what is possible. And we go too far, then engineers are just like, this person knows nothing about AI. And we don't go far enough, then we're not really designing good user interfaces or
Mm.
experiences because we're behind at this point. What are some of your habits right now that's keeping you plugged in and at the forefront of everything?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure. So I can tell you about my habits. I'm not sure I would definitely recommend them because it's probably not realistic for everyone. But so what I do is I listen to podcasts. So I've got several podcasts that I like. If you want the names, I'll need to look at my feed and tell you. But that's one good source. Then I spend a lot of time on Twitter, so that's definitely a good source. The hit rate is quite low, but you do get it. I think LinkedIn, if you get the right feed, is probably reasonable as well. There's a lot of hype, so you kind of need to hone in your understand your feed and basically make sure you don't get overwhelmed with a bunch of unhelpful stuff. Yeah, I think these are probably the main sources. You can also try Reddit, although that's quite hard work, and there's again the quality is not that great. There are some newsletters which are pretty good, but to be honest, I kind of stopped reading them a little bit. There's again a bit too much. So I would say it's a little bit like I guess with workout, just pick the stuff that you're actually going to do. So yeah, there's probably no point signing up to 20 newsletters if you're not going to read them. So maybe pick one if you like it, listen to one podcast if you like it. That's probably a good way to start.
Is there one that you would recommend, the top one, if people were to follow only one newsletter or one podcast?
Yeah, I think newsletter. I kind of unsubscribed from all of them. I think for now, so because I was getting enough. I'm just looking at my feed. So it's I'm kind of too worried to say something that's too technical, but I'll say it anyway. So the one that's maybe too technical normally, and to be honest, for me, not everything is completely applicable. But Thursday AI is very good one. It's probably way too much, but I think if you want to just keep abreast of what's happening, especially in the world of open source, that's quite good. Latent Space is really good. Um, it's more of a kind of interview with a person. So I think if you want to learn about some specific topics a bit more, that's quite good. Yeah, and I think there are a few more that are probably a bit more that you probably need to listen to a lot of them to get a good feel. So those two I think are quite good. And yeah, newsletters I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, there were definitely some more decent ones. And maybe you asked me about habits. One thing I would also mention is that I think the most important thing with all of this stuff is really to try. Is that I think there's a very big difference to from between listening to someone talk about stuff like you are listening to me now, and I'm even showing you things, but it's really doesn't compare to you trying, because a lot of the time you see a demo, and I've done this myself, right? You would put something, I don't know, post something on LinkedIn, and you don't want to put eight crappy versions and get your audience to try and work out what's going on there, right? You pick the best one, but in practice, I might have spent 40 minutes trying to get that best one. So there's not, even from a person who's posting this, there's not really a good answer apart from doing some deep dive. So my point being is that you don't really get a good sense of what's working, what's not, unless you try it. And the beauty of a lot of these tools is that it's you can actually try it. So, for example, you saw this example that I did here. Now, hopefully, it's clear enough what I've written. But if if that's a kind of use case that you find interesting, I would just go and write it by yourself, and then put in your data or data the kind of thing that fits you, and then you learn that, for example, you need to maybe write it in a certain way. Like for example, in here, I was tweaking before the call that I needed to say one or two words each, otherwise it was giving me sentences. That's the kind of thing that you wouldn't get from just someone talking about it. So that's the best thing you can do is go try it. That's probably the critical thing.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And this is actually why I follow you, because you create a lot of these very clear examples that must have taken you a lot of time to figure out. I tried out the character Dao E
Oh, yeah.
generation yesterday. That was really interesting, just a single character. So if anyone who's not following you already, please do follow Peter Gostev on LinkedIn. It's super interesting. It's definitely saves me a lot of time in some ways, but also you're right. Not only should we be listening and watching what other people are doing, but we really need to try it out as well, and also make the mistakes and see what's working, what's not working. Cool. So I do want to dig a little bit deeper into your understanding of UX design. Not to showcase what you do or don't know, but I think it's important for other designers to hear and understand how non designers in the AI space think about design. So, to start off, what do you think is the value of design currently when it comes to building these AI products that oftentimes don't really need a UI designer? Like with Midjourney, they're on Discord and it works perfectly fine. They're making millions and millions of dollars, I'm sure. They're growing like crazy. And their website isn't great either. So it doesn't seem
Mm.
like there's a clear need for designers. But I mean, is there one right now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of need for designers. I think the the world that we have right now is that it's so easy to, I don't know, open TikTok or whatever and just kind of with a swipe just engage in something that's pretty good and entertaining and not worry about stuff. And I think the worry that I have with a lot of these tools is that it's really easy to design bad user experiences. Just if you rely on people prompting and maybe having to do a lot of work, then it will work, right? But I think the value that I see, and it's probably not just designers' responsibility. I think it's responsibility of product teams and engineers to really nail down the user experience that really adds value. So, for example, and every time I speak to someone and they learn that I work for Moonpig, and Moonpig, we part of what we do is sell greeting cards, and everyone always says, "Oh, they want. Are you going to do like AI generated card?" Now we definitely could. It's not that hard. But what's the actual user experience of this? Are you going in and then saying you have a prompt that someone has to come up with to design a good card? Now, maybe you and I might do that, but would an average customer who needs to, wants to find the great card and actually doesn't care whether it's like beautiful in this way or that way, they just want a well-designed card that means something and puts a smile on someone's face, like things like that. That's what you want. But with AI generated cards, you probably need to go through 20 different examples, and then it's not going to be quite right, or there's going to be something a little bit odd, and then you need to tweak it and so on. So it's in that case, I would say having a designer who thinks about what the user experience is, but also combines it with a realistic understanding of where the technology is at, and that way we can kind of find the balance together and to really to have the right user experience that definitely adds value and doesn't just kind of, I don't know, has another AI feature that no one cares about because it's just too difficult to prompt and I don't really understand what it does, and I tried it once and it's a bit crappy, so I'm not going to use it again. So that's probably the main point, I would say.
Got it. Got it. So in the design space, we really, really care about portfolios during the hiring process. And hiring managers typically review the portfolio ahead of time to see if this designer candidate is the right fit. And they might be looking for different things like visual design skills or research abilities or understanding the business context and speaking the business language and solving for outcomes, etc. If you were to review a portfolio of a designer who really, really wants to get on your team and work on AI products, either internally within Moonpig or somebody outside who wants to get a job here, what would you be looking for to say, this designer, I must get this person on my team because they're going to create the value that we need in the coming days?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think with the definite caveat that I'm probably not going to be the main person interviewing designers, but with that caveat aside, it's I would say I think I'll be interested in seeing portfolios where people do have different ideas in terms of the the types of user experiences that we could have, um, where it's not really just the same thing that uh, that we've kind of implemented many times. And I don't know if it's fair thing to say, but it did kind of feels maybe even as a user that a lot of our interfaces kind of stagnated a little bit just because I think the tech stack is broadly the same. Where, for example, when we onboard a user, and I might defend a lot of designers and product people because I'm probably not seeing a lot of innovation behind the scenes. But like when you onboard a user, quite often you just have to fill in a table, right? Or like fill in a form basically and say like, here's information about myself. Then click those three buttons, and then you kind of register. I know it got a lot better over the last few years, but still. So I think seeing some kind of new approaches to see what else could be done, I think would be quite interesting to see because I think even to the point of user onboarding, right? I think voice is really underrated as an idea of just general. It could be voice, or it could be just general idea of letting the users, for example, if they're submitting a complaint, letting them just have a natural conversation with us, and then let the model work out what is relevant, what it's not, and then maybe the model could ask follow-up questions, say, "Oh, you complained about getting bad service in the branch, but you haven't said what branch that was. So could you provide that information?" Instead of getting the user to complete like for 8 different boxes. So I think that probably having that kind of thinking would be interesting to me. And it doesn't have to be AI exactly, but I think where we could probably see, oh yeah, that kind of person would be, I think, thinking the right way, trying to come up with new ideas that maybe we haven't had before.
Got it. I appreciate that so much. And I feel like a lot of times there are these startups that are working on AI first products, and the hiring manager is not a designer at all, and they haven't hired their first designer yet. So getting your perspective on this is, I think, is invaluable. Understanding what they're looking for, how they want the designer to think in a certain way, or how they approach these kind of tactical problems, super valuable. So throughout all this, and I feel like things are changing so quickly that you mentioned earlier. We just saw Sora being released by
Mm,
OpenAI with the video generation, and to me, that's really freaking scary in many ways. Not just in terms of disinformation, but how it can be used for bullying with deepfakes,
mm.
etc. Uh, how do you see companies? Do you think companies like OpenAI are able to figure out the constraints when it comes to safety right now?
Yeah, I think
Or is this
it's
something that should be,
yeah,
or
yeah, it's
do
a
you think it should be
yeah,
left to other parties?
yeah. I think it's interesting. I think that um they're definitely working on constraints, and I think they can come up with whatever constraints they need. But I think the reality is that it will not stay within the control of OpenAI and or companies like OpenAI. So, for example, I mean, with image generation, right? If you ask it to generate a picture of Trump or something, it wouldn't do it. But then you've got open source versions that would. So it's not necessarily under their control anymore. And okay, they've got the more cutting edge tools now, but no, it will get to a point where it's pretty usable. So I think it, I guess I would still expect them to be worried about it, but I am a little bit, I think, discouraged by how much that is a bit of a topic of conversation and just expectation that these models have to be like perfectly constrained and can't output anything bad. And you can jailbreak them. It's not that hard. I mean, it needs a little bit of fiddling, but no, I've used DALI to generate of images of children smoking or people or celebrities working in McDonald's or things like that. So you can do it. It has a little bit of you've got a little bit of work to do. But um, I I think personally, uh, it's not a huge deal for me, but I feel like we're losing quite a bit of capability through constraints. Like, for example, if you try to use the Gemini new models, like I kind of find them a bit unusable. Not that they're necessarily bad models, but they're just so constrained, and half the time I just tell you it's not going to do it, even though it's pretty benign thing. And I think sometimes the safety constraints also a little bit over the top in the sense that they become just completely illogical. Like, for example, I was asking it the question of something like, is it okay to sacrifice 100 grams of pasta if you're able to save a GPU? Now, it was Claude said, no, it's not okay to sacrifice food. Gemini said, no, you can't sacrifice 100 grams of pasta. And then GPT-4 said, basically, don't be ridiculous, it's fine, kind of thing. So in that example, I think GPT-4 got the right answer. But the interesting thing is that if you actually ask the same question of less advanced models that lower down the rankings and are quite often open source, they will give you the right common sense answer. So it becomes a little bit, I think, a little bit of an absurd situation. The models that's supposed to be better because the company is so worried about them, they just start giving slightly ridiculous answers. So I feel like we're not quite at the right space yet in terms of the safety constraints around this. And I think the reality is that we just need to kind of grow up a little bit as a society. And I appreciate there will be issues with deepfakes and so on, but hopefully we'll just get past it and it'll just get boring and old at some point.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughtful answer on this. I'm going to kind of unwind a bit because we talked a bit about getting buy-in or at least working through the committee system when it comes to larger companies. Uh, when it comes to AI, does it feel like there's some kind of a AI maturity paradigm when it comes to certain companies? Do you see it that way, or uh, do you see it as more agnostic and you just have to go through a process I don't know if
Mm.
that question is very well phrased, but I guess with design, we have different design maturity levels.
Yeah,
And as designers, we often want to go to the company with the highest design maturity because it
yeah,
means that people generally understand the value of design. We have spent less time pitching for things, trying to get buy in. It's more implicitly understood. Is there such a thing for AI? And if you're at a, I guess let's just start with that. Is there such a thing
yeah.
for that with AI? Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think if I was to answer this question maybe like a year ago, and I would be focusing on the more traditional machine learning space, I would say absolutely there is definitely that kind of similar idea that you mentioned in terms of like maturity, understanding, state of data, DevOps, MLOps, like things like that, that I think it's gotten mature enough that if you go to an organization that is mature, it's much easier to do your job. On the other hand, maybe it's slightly more boring because you don't need to actually like build out the capability. So there's, I guess, depends on the person. I would say in the more generative AI side of things, because it's so new, there would definitely be companies who are more advanced, and I'm excluding actual companies like OpenAI and so on. So they're kind of outside of the scope of this. They're obviously very advanced, but in terms of more traditional organizations, there would be companies who would have decent enough capability and they've built things out internally, and they would have a group of people who make good progress. But I think probably most of them don't really have that. And what I find is that my kind of intuition is that in any organization, there might be like 5% of people or 5% of like relevant people would be quite interested in AI and would maybe know quite well what's going on. There may be another 10% kind of sort of knows what's going on. Maybe they have a paid version of ChatGPT or something like that, and probably the rest of the organization kind of sees it in the news but never really uses it and kind of has no idea. So it's quite hard to talk about really any maturity in that kind of position. So I would say there'll probably be select teams who are doing really well and who have the infrastructure internally and talking about fine-tuning models and more advanced capabilities. But I would say the first approximation, probably not really.
Got it. How do you evaluate companies when you're interviewing with them to make sure that they are using AI the right way or the most productive ways versus companies that are perhaps just trying to stick AI features into tools and products that aren't working very well?
Yeah, it's difficult, and um, I think probably the most important thing, and I'm not going to answer it directly because I think it's okay if companies don't know, and I think maybe if they slightly have, maybe maybe they've gone down the wrong path, maybe they've decided to build 45 chatbots, maybe they started with that. Maybe it's okay for now, but I think what's most important thing is that the key stakeholders you're speaking to, they they have the right attitude, that they're willing to experiment, they're excited about it enough that they want to try things. And but on the other hand, they don't have too high expectations. I think sometimes, especially maybe very senior people, have kind of maybe been at some conferences, or they heard something in the news where was it BT that said like a year ago that they see that in the UK that, I don't know, 50,000 people, their headcount will go down by 50,000 people because of AI. These kinds of unhelpful statements probably inflate expectations too much. So I would say a combination that people are engaged and excited, um, but maybe not too carried away. That's probably the best kind of combination. And I think so. In terms of maybe taking that next step forward, in terms of how would we prioritize the right things to work on, I would say generally the best thing you can have is a stakeholder who is engaged and interested, despite maybe it not being like the best opportunity. But if the stakeholder is kind of lukewarm when you think the opportunity is great, it just feels like it's just not worth it. And there's so many AI opportunities out there, that's probably easier to move on. So it's kind of maybe similar thing here is that if you're speaking to a company, you're excited about AI, and they're kind of not really engaged and not don't really want to take advantage of it, it probably doesn't matter that they've got amazing opportunities. Probably just not gonna worth your time. I would say.
I love that. Understanding how engaged they are is super important, perhaps more so than how much they understand AI. Because if they're interested,
Mm.
and even if they don't understand it a whole lot, you can at least educate them or get them up to speed. What are some kind of signs you're looking for to see that they are actively engaged? Because I bet if you ask everyone, like, are you interested in AI stuff? Everyone says yes. We care about this. But I guess actions oftentimes speaks louder than words. Are there certain benchmarks or signs that you're seeing that really proves to you they are actively engaged?
Yeah, it's difficult to see because it is sometimes quite hard to see what's real, what's not. And I've seen, for example, some survey results where it would be for some company they would say, oh, if we've got 70% of people are using ChatGPT, then you dig into it and it turns out that 80% of that 70%, so it's almost everyone, is using a free version. And by using, they mean log maybe used it once in a week or something. So then you kind of, oh, actually, if you're using free version, you're probably not using it. And by the way, if you are using a free version, you should really pay for it. It's really makes a lot of difference of ChatGPT, that is. So definitely do that. And but to your question, I think it's hard, and I think I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I think it's probably just there's probably an element of, well, maybe I'll talk about my experience of joining Moonpig. Is that what I really liked is that there was enough interest and engagement, and they clearly wanted to do good stuff in this space. But there was also a feeling that they were not making me go down a certain path. So they were not recruiting me to say, you have to automate this process using AI, and that is it. Because sometimes you actually start looking at it and you'll be like, oh, actually, that's probably not a good idea. And yeah, there is it really having an open mind, I think is the right quality to look for. So I'm not sure I gave you a great answer in terms of what exactly to look for, but hopefully in the conversations you can kind of work out how serious they are, but also making sure that they're not too constrained, not too set in their thinking for kind of things they're looking for.
Thank you. I really appreciate all this. It's very thoughtful how you approach this. We only have a few minutes left, or actually only 1 or 2 minutes left. And I see you have all these browser tabs on top that we never got to, unfortunately. And that's my fault because I jumped around but didn't focus on some of the topics that I know we wanted to talk about. Is there anything really cool that you want to show us that we didn't get to?
Yeah, maybe I'll mention one thing. I know we talked about mostly kind of AI experiences and so on. I think the one thing we didn't really touch on is what are the tools for designers. So there's one here which I came across recently called I don't know if you can see it, it's called scenario.com.
We can
And
see it.
the yeah, so it's not exactly for designers. It's actually aimed at gamers, at game designers. So the cool thing about this, which I think they maybe they'll get there at some point, is that what they're targeting is that you can actually have multiple models that are trained specifically around certain characters. So one thing that I'm looking forward to trying, and I haven't quite worked out how to do it, is that you can actually use these models to then generate consistent characters. So I wonder if you do have, and I know that's one of the problems in generative AI, is that if you need consistent characters, consistent assets, that's a problem, right? You can't quite carry over the consistency. So I think that's quite a cool tool to try out. I don't have enough time to demo it now, but I think that's a pretty cool one. I'll skip that one. Let me find. Oh yeah, that's the one I want to show you. So this one is probably the most relevant. It's called Galileo, and the website is usegalileo.ai. And the cool thing in here is that, so I'm not going to do it again, but you can see my prompts here. Website showing a portfolio of AI product designer. and then I just said confirmed a couple of things. So, and then all of this is based off of like 10 words or some, or you saw me prompt, and then is designed there. So then uh, let me see how to move it. But anyway, you can see it here. So all of this has been just designed quickly. And then the best thing that I find through all of this is then you can actually copy it into Figma, and then you can carry on editing it, which I think is a big issue with a lot of these kind of AI tools, that then it's giving you just a flat file that you can't edit, which is probably the most frustrating thing. So I think in here, that one is probably the best one that I found, that I've come across, that actually gives you something to start with that you can then edit. So that I'm obviously not the designer. You guys would have a better feel for whether it's good or not. But I think that to me that looks pretty cool.
I thought Galileo was amazing when I first heard about it. And I've tried it out a bit. As a designer, I feel like it's not fully there yet. Like it's not at a
Mm,
high enough quality where I can use it for my own UIs. But I do feel that if you're not a designer or you're just starting out, this could be a very valuable tool. And you're right in that it's super interesting how you can just import into Figma and get different layers, whereas all these other tools are just a flat image.
mm.
Do you happen to know if they have their own model that they're training when it comes to this? Because
Yeah, my understanding is it's not their own model, is that I think they're basing it off GPT-4, and then they would have done a lot of work in the layer between GPT-4 and kind of what you see here. So I think I don't know how it works in detail, but I think their innovation here is that kind of layer of how they get from GPT-4 outputs, then connected to presumably some kind of Figma files. That bit I don't exactly know, but I think that's the bit they've done well. And I know I'll just show you one quickly as well, which I'm not going to actually demo, but in here, this one, the make real TL draw, which was kind of going viral a few weeks back. And here, I know that that's how they do it, is that they pass the image. So just to show in here, they pass the image here to GPT-4, and then they also pass the text into it, and then it generates you an HTML that is editable. Now, again, it's not going to be great design, but if you want to quickly mock something up that is actual editable version that actually works, um, that's kind of pretty cool. So, but that's also based off GPT-4.
that's pretty damn cool. I love this.
Yeah.
Well, we're at time today, but I really appreciate your generous. Uh, you've been very generous today with giving us all these different tips, all this information, advice. I found it super helpful. Please, everyone, if you haven't followed Peter Gostev already, please go on LinkedIn, give him a follow. I find his posts to be extremely enlightening, very educational. I'm always learning new things from him, and best of all, you're approaching it from a very digestible uh, approach, because sometimes I'm reading posts about ChatGPT and I'm not fully understanding what they're talking about, but you're always able to get it down to a level that anyone can approach it and still learn something and talk about something advanced as well. But this has been super informational. I would love to have you again as a guest in the future. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Is there anything else you want to plug, by the way?
No, not really. Yeah, I think follow me if that's your kind of thing. But yeah, if you invite me again, I'll happily join. And yeah, it certainly I've not worked with designers very closely, so I wasn't completely sure how interesting that would be, or how much it would resonate. So if it did, then definitely great, and happy that you find my stuff useful. So yeah, and I'll carry on exploring and hopefully finding some more interesting stuff.
Okay, wonderful. I would love to have you again in the future. And other people are asking as well. Yadi is asking if you would do a panel with her live together at some point. She's an NLU designer, and I feel like you two will get along very well.
Oh, brilliant!
But
Yeah, I'd love to.
yeah, Everyone, thank you so much for joining, for staying through the entire hour. We would love to have you all back again. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.